One of the most difficult questions that one might ask when creating a oil painting of any kind is how do you approach layering a painting? Well, in this week's video, we're going to take a look at exactly how to do that. Here we have our model Netta, and I'm going to keep an image of her to the top left corner of your screen so you can refer to it as I develop the painting. So let's start off with the first layer of the process. I would most certainly label a underdrawing as a layer of the painting. Now it is not physically a layer of the actual painting, but it serves such a great role in the development of your painting that it's going to be an invaluable resource to the development of your artwork. So what we have here is a 11 by 14-inch pad of pastel paper. Now, if you want to know exactly which materials I'm using, all of that information will be typed in the description box below, so if you're ever curious as to what materials I'm using at any given point, just scroll down to the bottom of the video and I will have that information typed up for you. So we're going to be starting off trying to figure out our composition. So if you see that there's a little rectangle drawn in the 11 by 14-inch drawing pad, that is actually the outline of my canvas. So I'm trying to figure out the composition based on the corners of this rectangle. So the corners of the rectangle that makes up the canvas that we'll be using. So I'm starting off with a very simplified envelope. As you can tell, it's just a simple envelope with straight lines and angles as to give me the direction of which the model is going to be in relation to the canvas. So a prep drawing or a preparation drawing or a transfer drawing, whatever you want to call it, this layer of the painting is going to be extremely important. It's going to be the underlying architecture or the underlying scaffolding to your painting. So then we're going to be starting off very simply with this linear drawing, working general to specific. So after establishing that large envelope, now we're going to be working the inner shapes. So we're going to be working the outer shapes to the inner shapes. So now we have just a simplified geometric shape for where the head is going to be placed. I have a very defined mark for the topmost corner right about here and the bottommost corner of the chin. Working with straight lines and angles is going to be your tool and your guide towards having clarity in your shapes. So a drawing is nothing more than problem solving. So what we're doing is problem solving. The most important thing right now is to know what we're looking for. It's to ask the right questions. And the question right now is, where is everything going to fit in relation to our canvas? And we're going to figure that out with the under drawing. So as you notice, I'm erasing with the cloth. That is a chamois cloth. So just a chamois cloth. And this is actually medium vine charcoal. And again, if you want to know the specifics to my materials, all of that will be typed in the description box below. So I'm trying to figure out just a very simple abstract shape, and I'm trying to think about how these shapes relate to one another. So now we have a shape for the bottom of the neck, and now I'm making another straight line across the side of the neck that's actually covered by the hair. And I'm just thinking of these general angles. So we're going to be, again, working general to specific, but we don't want to be too general for the entire picture. So now we have a little angle there for the cast shadow of the bottom of the jaw. So we really want to be as minimalistic. Notice how I'm actually pushing that shape down. So I usually say, keep your shape simple and easy for you to understand, so that when the time comes to make any kind of changes, those changes will be simple and easy for you to understand. And another addition to that, keep your materials simple and easy for you to understand, because when the time comes to make a change, that change will be that much more simple for you to make. Look at how easy it is to just wipe off the charcoal and then reestablish that line. That is possible with oil paint, but it is a little bit more difficult. Now, if you've seen my previous videos, you know that I usually start off right on the canvas with a burnt umber or raw umber drawing color, doing the exact same thing that I'm doing with the charcoal. So you may wonder why I've started doing these under drawings with the charcoal, and that is because it gives you a second chance. So notice how I'm starting to get now a little shape here, a little angle for the eye sockets. Just a simple rectangular shape at this point will do. But in any case, it gives you a second chance. So if you mess up in the under drawing, that's all right. When you transfer it on to your canvas, any kind of mistakes, you might even catch them in the transferring process and have that much more of an advantage. So right here we have now the center line of the portrait. And I'm going to use this brush here just to get a vertical and a horizontal measurement. So whenever you're trying to establish the shape or the exact placement, notice right here the forehead to the eyebrows and the eyebrows to the nose is going to make up a distance that you can use to measure. So whenever you're trying to pinpoint where anything goes, it's important to use vertical lines or horizontal lines. So the forehead, the top of the hairline to the eyebrows is 1/3. The eyebrows to the bottom of the nose is another third. And the last third would be from the bottom of the nose to the bottom of the chin. Now that is a generalized canon of proportions, and it's a good way to start. And it's a good way to make the drawing that you're working on look human. But you can also use those canon of proportions to also gauge how specific your model varies from the basic canon of proportions. So say that the nose to the bottom of the chin is actually a little bit larger than the, say, the eyebrows to the bottom of the nose. That kind of observation will make your drawing that much more accurate. So now we've just mapped out just a simple shape for the eye socket. So now we're starting to draw in the little inner concavity of one eye socket. Now we have an axis mark for the eyes themselves. So I'm going to use again just a horizontal line to help me gauge that angle. That angle is pretty acute. It's probably about a, I don't know, maybe a 10-degree or a 5-degree angle, very tiny angle. So now we have another corner of the eye. Notice how the eyes start so simple, very much just two lines creating a rectangle without a bottom. So here we have another shape for the other eye, and I want to make sure that every single shape that I place down is in such a way that I understand what I'm trying to describe. So like I said before, it's important to know what questions to ask. So in the beginning, right around this stage, the question to ask is, where are these eyes going to fit? Now you can't start finished and you can't start correct. You have to start somewhere. So that's what we're doing with these generalized shapes. We're starting somewhere, and then we're going to make them more and more specific. Now, again, I'm going to consider this a layer of the painting, the underdrawing. It is pretty much the where does everything go layer. So here we have, again, checking our measurements. So, of course, the bottom of the nose is defined right around there. So I just want to make sure just by eye to make these place markers. So now I'm going to hold the brush up to the angle again. So I just want to make sure that that center line is angled correctly. Otherwise, the features are going to be off their axes. So in any case, I will consider this a layer of the painting. You can consider it a very basic layer, if anything, because it is going to be transferred onto the canvas itself. But it is so important that you spend as much time as you can and really slow down and try to pinpoint exactly where each feature is going to go. I can't emphasize enough how this has helped many people and how this has helped me in getting more of a likeness and getting more of the actual person in the painting. And that is by taking your time with these simple shapes. So now with the mouth and with the bottom of the jawline, we started to block in just a simple shadow shape. And we're going to move these shapes around for a while until they are as close as we can possibly get them to the actual model. And never stop observing. Always keep observing. I think maybe observe the model just as much, spend as much time observing as you do actually making marks onto your paper or your canvas. So here again, we're checking this angle for the axes of the eyes. So now we're just going to be blocking in just a little bit more of a specified shape, but still not really too much information for the eye yet. That little tiny brush, that little tiny watercolor brush is very useful for just pushing the charcoal just a tiny bit. So here we have a little dark shape right about here, and now we're going to fill this corner in here. So another thing to note about drawing itself is that uh, things may look right to you, things may look right to me at any given point in time in the drawing. And then we'll come back after a couple hours or so, and just like magic, the eye is a little too far down, the nose is a little bit off its axis. And you know how that feels with a portrait. Any little tiny thing that's off can be monumental, especially if you're painting a portrait or drawing a portrait of a friend, a family member, a loved one, or anything like that. So make sure to spend time with your linear drawing in this kind of fashion. Just light and shade. We just filled in just a little bit of charcoal for the dark mass of the hair. And now we're going to go in and reinforce the outlines for the light and shade with this charcoal pencil. It's just a simple general's charcoal pencil, again, that will be typed in the description box below. And this dark outline will also help with the transfer paper. I will be able to see the dark marks of this charcoal pencil a little bit more clearly through the transfer paper. So here is our transfer drawing. And now we're going to cover it with transfer paper and use a burnt umber colored pastel pencil. And we're going to be using just simple straight lines and angles and just enough to let us know where the features are going to fit in relation to one another. So after flipping the paper over to cover the backside with charcoal, I noticed that I had one eye off its axis. So this eye right here is a little bit too far down. So like I said, creating the transfer drawing gives you this second chance because you can correct your mistakes directly on the transfer paper and then transfer a more solid drawing onto your canvas. So after making that correction, we're just going to cover all of those lines again with the charcoal. So just simply just going over every line with the charcoal. It's a very meditative process, really. Maybe a cup of tea and some classical music as you're filling in the lines. So now we flipped it over to the front side. So now we're just going to be going over the lines one final time with a pen. So I recommend a pen that is a different color than the color of your charcoal or your pastel. So now let's flip it over, and there it is. The transfer drawing is on the canvas and we're ready to go. So we're going to go over top of these lines with uh, acrylic burnt umber paint. Now I'm choosing to use acrylic just because it dries very fast. You can use oil paint, and in the last video I actually did use oil paint instead. Uh, so now I'm going to go over with a very light wash of Ivory Black. So now the layering of the oil painting is really going to start to show. So we're covering everything except for the light portions of the face with that thin wash of Ivory Black, and that is acrylic paint. So we're going to let that dry, and we're going to see why that's going to be useful in a second. So we're using lead white, raw umber, alizarin crimson, cadmium red, yellow ochre, cadmium yellow, sap green, ultramarine blue, and ivory black. And these are traditional oil paints. That is, they are not water mixable oil paints. I know that I used water mixable oil paints for the past 2 videos, but I've switched back for this video to traditional oil paints. And that's just because I like the way that these colors mix a little bit more. So that's why I switched to the traditional oil paints for this video. But in any case, we're going to start off with the darks. And so while I'm putting in these darks, I will tell you why I left the light areas of the face white. And that is because I found that having a very light surface beneath your color mixtures and beneath your layers actually helps, almost like stained glass, if you imagine it like that. Almost like the white of the canvas is like light from the stained glass showing through. It actually helps the colors look a little bit more luminous. So now we covered the dark area of the hair, and we're going to be following the fat over lean principle. So another important aspect to oil painting is the fat over lean principle, and that is what will allow your paintings to last longer without cracking and all of that stuff. So the fat over lean principle means that you're going to want to use less medium in your first layers and introduce more and more medium as you add more and more layers to your painting. So fat over lean does not mean painting thick over thin as usually thought, but it actually means using less medium in the beginning and then making the paint mixtures more and more lean as you go by introducing more medium. So all we did was cover the dark shapes of the hair and the dark shapes of the shadow. So the mixture of the shadow is a very simple combination of raw umber, a tad bit of alizarin crimson, and some ivory black. Very simple. So with some cadmium red, cadmium yellow, a little bit of the lead white, some sap green to neutralize the warmth of the flesh tone. We're going to be mixing up a very basic flesh tone that we're going to use to introduce the first layer onto the flesh tones of the face. So just using sap green and raw umber to neutralize the warmth of the cadmium red, cadmium yellow mixture is going to help me out with these colors. So I'm going to be using no medium. There's hardly any medium on the paintbrush. If anything, it's just a little bit of the mineral spirits. And so this is also referred to as dry brushing, where you're kind of scrubbing in a first layer onto the painting. Now then, I'm going to be covering the entire surface of the white of the canvas with very simple and warm colors. And those colors are then going to be modified with the further layers of the painting. So this is not a this is not glazing just yet. The paint is very opaque, so it's very thick with little to no medium. And the purpose of this pass is to establish the large value and color relationships. Now you could do this with just monochrome, as I have done in the past two videos, where I just started the painting off in monochrome. So this is more of it can also be referred to as a color under painting. Now the trick to this is going to be that we're going to be focusing on these large planes. So each value change that you see, remember value just means how light or how dark something is relative to something else. So each value change is going to indicate a plane change, but the trick is going to be leaving the white underneath will allow these colors to be a little bit more luminous, but at the same time, the lines that we drew in with the burnt umber acrylic paint will show through this layer of oil paint. So we will not lose our drawing in the application of paint, and that's a big advantage to this technique. Oftentimes we're afraid to go into color because we don't want to lose that drawing that we spend so much time working on. Well, keeping that white underneath and going over it with something like burnt umber acrylic paint or even burnt umber oil paint, then of course letting it dry, allows you to go over the surface like this with pretty much a dry brush and scumbling it on without the fear of losing your drawing. So this is a huge benefit to this technique, is that we will not lose our drawing with the application of paint. So now notice there's kind of a value scale developing on my palette where the lighter values are on the top closer to the lead white, and then the darker values are getting further beneath the palette. So that is no mistake, and that is pretty much just habit now, just keeping the values on the palette organized. So the idea is that if the palette has an organization of value, then the painting too will also have that kind of organization. Well, in theory, that's what will happen. So we're going to be pushing the chroma a little bit. So we're adding a little bit more cadmium red, and then just bringing it down just a slight bit with the sap green. So here at this corner of the nose, the color is actually a little bit warmer. So that's another benefit to working in this way. You're actually at liberty to experiment with the colors, because if you get the color wrong, you can just wipe it off, have very minimal effect on your painting, and of course still maintain your drawing. So now we have placed kind of a halftone beneath the eyebrow. That entire region beneath the eyebrow is going to be a zone, and this area beneath the nose is going to be another zone. So a zone can be thought of as an area in which there is a specific value family. So the zone of the area beneath the eyebrow and above the eye is going to be a zone that's darker in general than the colors and values surrounding it, and the area beneath the nose is also going to be darker than the areas surrounding it. So now we're going to be adding in some more colors to the cheekbone. So this is the zygomatic region of the portrait, which means just the cheekbone. And now we're going to go right over these lines. Remember, I said, don't be afraid. You will not lose your drawing so long as you keep the application of paint just opaque enough to fill the surface and scumble the color onto your painting. And that is really the trick to this layering process. So here we have a very definitive angle here for the side plane of the face, which is going to create another zone. So this zone is going to be even darker than, say, the light on the side plane of the nose, or the light facing the nose, and it's going to be an area that is going to have a very compressed value range. So we're actually going to go ahead and flatten the rest of this area out. So it's going to be a little cooler. So we're going to throw in a little sap green, perhaps too much sap green. So let's uh, bring some more warmth with a little bit more of the alizarin crimson into the mix with some raw umber. So again, we're just filling this in, basically dry brushing it. So we're just trying to fill this in, and don't worry about losing your drawing, and don't worry about the color just yet. We're just getting a feel for the colors with this layer, and we're covering the surface and exploring the planes all together. So this area right here is going to be another zone, and it's also going to be a little bit darker, but very similar, in fact, to the side plane of the face in terms of the relative value. So now this area right beneath here is going to be the dark light. So that's going to be the area approaching the dark light. So the dark light is the area in the light just as you approach the shadow. And we'll get back to that later because it's going to be very important to creating the illusion of form. So now we've pushed the value change on the cheeks, maybe a little bit too much, but that's all right because working in this process, it's a very relaxed way of working where you don't have to worry too much about getting the color and the value down just right with each individual brushstroke. You don't need to worry about that with the layering process. All you need to focus on is getting a handle on these planes and these large value relationships. And that's all you really need to worry about, all you really need to focus on with this layer. So now we're going to cover the rest of the white over here. So now the trick is that the white underneath of these colors is going to show through. Inevitably, it will show through. And if we ever want to bring the values up again, so if we think we went too dark in one area, all you really need is some paper towel and you can subtract and get your lightest light back. It's really a very useful way of working with the oil paint. So now this area of the ear is actually just a little bit more pink. So we threw in a little bit more of the reds into that mixture. So now let's get a little bit more sap green to neutralize this mixture. So here we have just a little scumble of color onto the bottom of the neck. And now we're going to go ahead and remix the value for the shadow. So that shadow got a little bit too light. So just with some raw umber, let's go ahead and reestablish that shadow. And again, don't be afraid of losing your drawing. That drawing is going to show through thanks to the white of the canvas contrasting with the color of the burnt umber that we used to draw in the linear foundation. Now you can clearly see that those lines are still visible. So the drawing was not lost in covering these colors and these tones. So now we're going in with pretty much the same mixture of raw umber and some sap green and a tad bit of alizarin crimson. You know that I like to mix those colors. So now we have the dark of the eyebrow and the dark of the inner concavity right here of the eye socket. And now we're going to be uh, developing the forms of the eye. And in your painting, you could spend all day on developing the form of this eye with the peace of mind that knowing, peace of mind and knowing that your drawing is solid. You don't have to worry about the angles or the placements of anything. At this point, all you need to focus on is spending your time on refining these values and further sculpting the forms. Very much a relaxing way of working. Now, the contrast to this would be alla prima. Alla prima would be trying to get everything done all in one sitting, shape, value, color, all at once. Can be a lot of fun, but can be very stressful at times. And this method is just a lot more manageable. So now then, we put in just a simple dark value a unified dark mass surrounding the inner concavity of the eye as it turns away from the light. And so now we're putting in the dark accent just below the upper eyelid, and that form is wrapping away from the light very dramatically, which is giving it that distinct dark value. This dark value right here. It is not a dark value that is existing because of makeup or anything like that. It's a dark value that we're placing in because the upper eyelid is wrapping beneath the surface and catching very little to no light, and that's why it's that dark. And we put in a little bit of alizarin crimson, just a little touch of red to the corner of the eye, and now we're going to go in with ivory black and the lead white for the sclera of the eye, and just a little touch of the flesh tones. So the sclera of the eye is the white of the eye, and the white of the eye is not white. As you can clearly tell with the photo reference, the light of the eye is actually a little bit cooler in temperature, and the value is very much a halftone. The value of the sclera is actually a little bit closer to that of the surrounding flesh tones. So here we have the color is being scumbled onto the surface, and that's not a mistake. That is because I'm letting the white of the canvas show through the mixture of paint that we use for the sclera, and that will actually help to bring out some more of the chroma of the oil paint itself. So now we're just following through with a little dark shape here, pretty much just raw umber and ivory black surrounding the eye, just adding a few little tiny shapes. It's very fun to develop these forms in this way, knowing that you don't have to worry about your drawing anymore. You don't have to worry about any of that. All you're doing is just spending your time with each individual piece of the puzzle and relating each shape to its corresponding shapes. And that's really all it is. It's just a matter of relating one shape to another shape and carefully observing them. Remember, spend just as much time observing as you do actually painting. You'd be surprised at how much information is missed when we're spending so much time just trying to hurry and hurry and hurry and apply more and more layers of paint. So here we have just a little bit of a darker halftone right below the bottom eyelid as it starts to turn away from the light. So now we're describing the way that the light is wrapping around this structure, and that's all you really need to describe the forms, is just to tell the story of how the light wraps around each individual structure, and that's how you will get the illusion of form with each individual passage of value. Now, the layer that we applied in the beginning, the dry brush layer, so that is the colors we applied without using any medium, will actually serve as grip. So it'll actually help these layers or these brush strokes to stick onto the canvas with much more ease. So using the medium now, so we're going to be using a little bit of Galkid medium. So Galkid is a fast dryer, and it just helps to thin out the paint a little bit. Remember, use medium to thin out your paint whenever you want it to be a little bit more thin, and use your odorless mineral spirits to clean the brush. Don't try not to use your odorless mineral spirits to thin the paint, but rather use a medium to do that for you. Now then, the initial layer that we applied, the dry brush layer, actually has provided more grip for this layer of paint to rest onto the surface and will allow you more precision with your shapes. again, a very useful thing uh, to use the fat over lean principle, because the first layer was with no medium, and as we continue to add more and more layers, we'll be using more and more of the medium. That is just a tiny bit of medium, really, just the tiniest minute bit of medium onto these mixtures. So now we have a very simple halftone. So this is going to be the dark light. So the dark light, this value right here, I'm going to emphasize as the most important value that you want to describe in order to get the curvature of the form. Notice how very simply that one brushstroke helped to create the illusion of the nostril seeming to actually turn in space. So now we're going to add another little plane right here. So this is a bottom plane to the bottom of the nose. So this is going to be at the bottom of the wing of the nose. So it's a little bit cooler in temperature. So I'm going to actually push that temperature change a little bit more. So I assure you these mixtures are nothing more than yellow ochre, cadmium red, lead white, and then some raw umber to cool them down. At this point, we're also trying to work with the edge quality a little bit. So this edge right here, as the wing of the nose turns into the actual dark of the nostril, is actually going to be a pretty sharp edge, and the edges around it are going to be softer. But the edge to the wing of the nose, so that is the little dark light that we were describing before, is going to be a much softer edge than, say, the edge of the delineation of the bottom plane of the nose. And even the bottom of the nostril is going to be a tiny bit softer. So the edge quality right about here is actually going to be much softer. And that is because just physically, the plane change between the nostril, so the wing of the nose, as it wraps into the nostril, just physically is a little bit sharper in this instance. And physically, the uh, edge between the corner of the nostril, so this area right here that we're going to make just a little bit lighter. So the top of the wing of the nose is going to have just a little halftone right here, and this edge is going to be very soft. It's going to be kind of a whispered on edge. It's going to be almost imperceptible. So remember, an imperceptible color or an imperceptible value is one that is so close to the surrounding values that it's barely perceptible to the eye. But that doesn't mean that you don't want to spend as much time as you can in studying it. It just means that it's very subtle, meaning that the value range is very compressed. Remember, the key to subtlety in your flesh tones or in your values is value compression. So if you want to make your flesh tones more and more subtle, then make the value range more and more compressed. So now we're moving on to the mouth. Notice that we did not lose the linear drawing when we covered in those masses of color. So now we're going to go on to describe the darkest darks around the corner of the side of the mouth. And at this point, the paint is gripping on very nicely as the first layer that we applied started to settle into the linen canvas. So again, the application of paint is such that we're using a tiny bit of the medium to thin out the paint. So a tiny bit of the Galkid medium can go a long way. And hey, you don't have to use Galkid medium if you don't want to. You can use stand oil mixed with a little bit of mineral spirits, or you can use Neo McGilp, or whichever kind of medium you'd like to use. I'm just choosing to use the Galkid medium. And again, all of that information is going to be typed in the description box below. So after we put in the darkest darks of the upper lip, now we're going to be going in with just a little bit more of the lead white with the alizarin crimson and some raw umber, and that's pretty much just about what we're using for this color of the upper lip. Now, an advantage to the lead white is that when lead white is combined with something like alizarin crimson, it's going to allow more of a deep, rich, dark red than if we were using, say, a more opaque white, like a titanium white. So lead white is a transparent white, which allows the depth of colors such as alizarin crimson to show through even more. And to add on to that, we also have the white of the canvas showing through the back side or the first layer of the painting. So it is really going to allow these colors to be a little bit more rich. So now we went in and placed a shape for the dark of the lower lip. And now with a little bit of cadmium red into mixture, just to introduce a little bit more of a pinkish tone for the bottom lip, we're now going to scrub in a little bit more of a value for the bottom lip. And again, you can spend as much time as you want to on each individual feature when you're working in this way because of that linear drawing. All of this rests on the strong linear drawing foundation. And I tell you, that linear drawing is the secret to portrait painting. That linear drawing is so important to the development of these paintings. So now we're going to put in just a little bit more of a halftone for the corner of the ear. So we're just using a little bit of the lead white onto this area of the palette. Very simple flesh tone mixtures. And so now we're just going to cover a little bit of the ear right about here. We're going to just try to reinforce some of the darker shapes and the lighter shapes for the ear and still try to keep it relatively simple. So here we have the earlobe. So just a little bit of light is showing for the earlobe, not too much. And I also want to make sure to keep these edges a little bit on the softer side, but I'm going to make them a little bit sharper as it approaches the bottom of the earlobe and a little bit softer as it moves away. And we use just a little touch of alizarin crimson just to add some more warmth to the shadows of the ear. And so here with just a little bit of ivory black, we have a little dark accent. So now the painting has dried. So this is a little over a day later. So now we're going to go over it with an oil out mixture. So we're oiling out the painting with mineral spirits combined with stand oil. So that mixture is 1 part stand oil, 4 parts mineral spirits. You can create that however you'd like. You can use 4 teaspoons of mineral spirits to 1 teaspoon of stand oil and mix it up, and there you go. So we're just scrubbing it onto the painting. Remember, we're scrubbing it onto the dry painting just to bring back some of the depth of the values and the intensity of the colors. So now the first thing you'd want to do when reworking a painting, another layer, is to reinforce the darks, because even though we oiled it out, the darks do tend to kind of fade in a little bit. So we're going to go in and reinforce this dark shape. Now again, remember the fat over lean principle means that you start off with less or little to no medium, and then as you work your way up with the layers, you use more and more medium, which in turn allows you to use techniques such as applying semi-transparent layers of oil paint, also known as glazing. So we will be utilizing some glazing a little bit later on with the flesh tones, but not too much of it. But in any case, now we're just covering some of the darks, and in turn, we're actually glazing a little bit of dark. So with glazing, the way glazing works is that you want to keep your paint mixture very thin. So notice this mixture is actually very thin. I used a little bit of the Galkid medium to thin it out, and we're going to let some of these brush strokes layer right on top of the dry mixture that we had before to create the effect of individual strands of hair. So the way that this works, so the way the glazing works is that you want to glaze a, in general, a darker value over a lighter value, and you want to glaze a warmer hue over a cooler hue. So that is one way that you can use glazing. So notice how I'm glazing darker onto the hair and a little bit warmer so that it shows through. And again, this is kind of like a stained glass effect because the white that was underneath the previous layer still is going to have some influence in the colors that are laid over them. So it helps the richness of the colors show through a little bit more. So we just soften that little edge right there on the corner of the hair. So we allowed some of the overlap of the dark mixture onto the forehead. And there you can actually see I glazed right over the ear actually just to get that value a little bit darker and to make the edge a little bit softer. And that was pretty much just to emphasize the lights on the face. So now we're going to go and mix up just a simple gray using the white and the ivory black. And we're going to just use this gray to help fix the outside shape of the hair and nothing more than that. So I actually decided not to put in the dark of the background as I wanted to emphasize just the layers of the flesh tones and the hair. And I didn't really want to focus too much on the background. I just wanted to keep it as a neutral color. So now we're going to go in with a little bit more of the dark. Notice I'm keeping separate brushes for the background and for the dark of the hair, just to not have to clean the brushes as often. So here we're going to soften this edge a little bit and leave the edge above the forehead a little bit more sharp as to emphasize more of a focal point, the focal point being the eyes. So we're just going to scumble just a little bit more just for the sake of texture, really. As I mix this color, I'm going to tell you another useful tip when you're layering your painting, and in particular, when you're layering over a dry painting that has color in it, just like we're doing now. So when you're painting another layer of color onto a dry painting that has color in it, such as this one, you want to keep your paint more thin when you're trying to work darker and more opaque when you're trying to work lighter. So that mixture of paint onto the ear was lighter, so it was more opaque, meaning it had less medium and more of the actual oil paint. And so now we're going to move on to an area that we are going to want to make a little bit darker. And so we're going to use a more thinned out mixture of oil paint. This is a semi-transparent application of color. So this is actually going to be a glaze. So we're going to be applying a semi-transparent layer of color onto this area of the top plane of the zygomatic region right about here, pretty much the side of the eye socket. So we're applying a semi-transparent layer of warm flesh tone on top of what once was a lighter area of color. So the reason that you want to keep track of your paint transparency is so that you allow the layers underneath to have some type of influence and to add more of a feeling of depth into your painting. If you use the same transparency or the same opacity for the entire painting, it may tend to lead to a more flat appearing painting. Whereas if you're uh, layering the paint in such a way that you uh, are letting some of the previous layers show through and help in the development of the forms, you are then going to have a much more dimensional painting. So now we're going to be applying a darker value. So that means we're going to be using a thinner mixture of oil paint. So this mixture has more of the medium in it to allow the previous layer beneath to show through. And in the scumbling of this color, we can also create a gradation of tone. So that's going to be really useful in describing the way that the form turns around the forehead. So now using the same flesh tones, we're going to paint in the light for the division of one area of hair to another area of hair. So this is pretty much just the same flesh tone that I had, and I'm just working right over top, and I'm working lighter. So that means this mixture is actually more opaque. I don't want it to show too much of the coolness of the ivory black. So I'm using a little bit more paint onto this area so it's a little bit more opaque. Remember, we're working lighter in value, so we want the paint to be a little bit more opaque. So now we're going to utilize some of these brush strokes to give the illusion of lighter planes onto the hair. And the nice thing about this is that it really doesn't take much to make it appear like hair from a distance. And again, you really want to make sure that the painting reads its best from a distance, say maybe 5 feet away. And now with some ultramarine blue, ivory black, and a tad bit of the white, we're going to cover just a flat shape for the shirt. And now we're going to be adding a darker value onto the hair. So you can already guess that that mixture is going to be more transparent, meaning it's going to have more medium. And we're going to let a little strand of hair show through right about there, just to emphasize a little bit that we're trying to paint some more of the little shapes and forms of the hair. So we're just going to be adding some dark right about here on the bottom of the hair, just so that it looks like it's resting on the shirt. And we're going to keep the edge quality to this area of the painting very soft. And we don't want to emphasize it too much, but we do want to add some little indications of light onto the hair here. So with the same brush that had the flesh tone, we just added a little plane of light. So now switching to the dark brush, we're going to be adding more paint onto this area right about here. And we're going to switch back to the light brush and then add some little indications of light onto that passage of hair. And then just a little bit more. And again, we're only using just the flesh tone, just taking flesh tone right off the palette to get this indication of light onto the hair. So this is also a nice area to observe that the brush that is applying the lighter value has more paint on it than the brush that is applying the darker value. But notice that I'm going to be letting this brush here get darker and darker. That is, the paint that's coming off the brush is darker and darker as it mixes into the surrounding values of the hair. So we're just squiggling the brush onto that area just to get a little effect of light onto the hair, but we don't really need that much for this area. And with that, we have this week's portrait painting demonstration. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that these videos are helping you out. I wish you the best in all of your artwork, and I'll see you on the next one.